For 400 years, they owned this palace. But today, their descendants pay the state for the right to live in their own home. They are tenants in their own fortress. It has 365 rooms, but it wasn't taken by an enemy or a creditor. It was taken by a law written for men. This is the story of how a house symbol, built to deceive time, became a trap for its creators. And now imagine that the rejected heiress, having lost everything, struck a blow in return that proved stronger than stone. To understand how her revenge, hidden in the pages of a great novel, made her the true mistress of this palace, we must return to the very first stone, which in 1566 was paid for with gold taken from God. Can you hear that? It's not silence. It's the echo of emptiness, the squeak of modern sneakers on a 16th century parquet floor, the digital click of a shutter trying to steal the soul of a portrait that has seen more kings than this tourist has seen winters. Today, Knole House is an exhibit, a polite, well-groomed corpse on display. People glide through its veins, through these endless corridors, and see only what the plaques allow them to see. The price, the date, the name. They look at the tapestries, but they don't see the soot of hundreds of winters ingrained in the threads. They touch the carved wood, but they don't feel the chill of despair that its grain has absorbed. Sunlight, slanted and golden, falls on the dust motes dancing in the air. The ashes of past centuries, the only true inhabitants of this place. But there is another ghost, not the kind that rattles chains in legends. This ghost is a cold draft in a locked room, the feeling of a gaze from an empty window. It is her. They call it a museum. I called it my skin. Every stone was a part of me. The break with Knole was like an amputation. They didn't take walls. They tore the heart from my memory, leaving a wound that never healed. This house breathed, and I breathed with it. Its smell, a mixture of beeswax, old leather, and rain on cold stone, was the smell of my childhood, the smell of absolute belonging and absolute loss. Her shadow still runs here, if you squint. A little girl in a white dress, rushing through the Cartwright Gallery, her laughter the only sound that can challenge the echoing silence. She glides across the polished oak of the ballroom, imagining herself a queen at a ball that will never be. She disappears behind a secret door, knowing this house as a surgeon knows the body on their table, its arteries, its dark corners, its secret scars. For her, it was not a palace, it was a kingdom. 365 rooms, one for each day of her life, 52 staircases, one for each week of her fantasies, 7 courtyards, where she learned to distinguish the sound of her own loneliness from the sound of the wind. This house is not just stone. It is a predator with a heart of stone and a merciless memory. It was built with a single purpose, to endure, to pass power from father to son, from son to grandson, an eternal, unbreakable chain of flesh and titles. It gazed upon generations of its masters with the cold arrogance of granite. It accepted their births, absorbed their weddings, and silently watched their deaths. It chose its master by a simple, cruel criterion, by blood and by sex. And so, when the time came, it rejected her, the girl who loved it more than anyone, the only child, flesh of their flesh, blood of their blood. The stone that should have been an anchor became a knife. The law, carved into invisible charters, proved stronger than love. How did a citadel, erected to deceive death and immortalize a name, become a monument to the greatest injustice? How did a palace, built for a dynasty, become the story of its most devoted, rejected daughter? To understand this, we must return to the very first stone, to the day when the earth still smelled of incense, and the king's coffers rang with gold taken from God. To understand this house, you must forget architecture and remember the slaughter. Before the first Sackville settled here, the air of England smelled of burning and fear. The old world did not die. It was murdered. King Henry VIII, driven not so much by faith as by greed, declared war on God himself, or at least on his vicars on earth. The monasteries, which for centuries had collected tithes and souls, were the first to fall. This was not a reformation. It was the largest state-sanctioned robbery in the country's history. We hear not theological disputes, but the ringing of hammers on stained glass, the screech of iron tearing lead from the roofs of abbeys, the sound of thousands of books, their parchment pages thrown into bonfires, and the cold silence that settled where Latin had been spoken for centuries. The king turned prayer into cash. Gold from crucifixes was melted down into coins bearing his profile. Stones from the sanctuary walls were used to build the royal stables. And the lands, the vast, fertile lands of the church, became his personal fund. Knole House, built with the archbishop's money, was one such asset. In 1538, it was not taken by storm. It was politely requested, and Archbishop Cranmer, knowing the price of refusal, handed the keys to the crown. The house ceased to be a house of God and became the property of the monarch, a trophy in the war against the past. And then she ascended the throne. Elizabeth, daughter of the schismatic king, a woman in a man's world who ruled not by force, but by intellect and ruthless calculation. She needed new people, not the old nobility who remembered their ancient rights, but ambitious, loyal predators whose fate was inextricably linked with her own. And this is where he enters the stage. Thomas Sackville, not a warrior with a sword, but a poet and a lawyer with the cold eyes of an accountant. He knew the price of a word and the power of the law, and he was her cousin. Blood. In Tudor England, it was the hardest currency. In 1566, the Queen grants him Knole. It is not a sale. It is a down payment, a golden collar of loyalty. She doesn't just give him a house. She bestows upon him a symbol of new power, a power built on the ruins of the old faith. Sackville understands the rules of the game. He becomes Lord High Treasurer. Now, all the financial arteries of England converge in his office. He literally holds the treasury in his hands. And here, in the silence of numbers and accounts, the alchemy of power takes place. The line between the state coffers and his personal wallet begins to blur until it disappears completely. Money squeezed from new taxes, profits from trade monopolies that he himself approves, income from lands that once belonged to the church. All of it is a single, murky stream that flows in two directions, into Her Majesty's treasury and onto the construction of his own magnificence, to the rebirth of Knole. The foundation of Sackville's new palace is not just laid on Kentish soil, it is laid on the bones of martyrs, paid for with coins in which you can still hear the echo of shattered church bells. Every beam, every stone is evidence of a deal with the crown, and perhaps with his conscience. The crucifix was broken, the treasury was full, and Knole was preparing to rise from the ashes of another's faith. Thomas Sackville was obsessed, not with the hot, feverish passion of an artist attacking a canvas. His obsession was cold, mathematical. It was the fever of an accountant who saw in numbers a path to eternity. He wasn't building a house. He was keeping a tally. Every hammer blow was the click of a bead on an abacus. Every stone laid was another figure in his personal ledger against oblivion. They say he built Knole in the image and likeness of time itself. 365 rooms, one for each day of the year. 52 staircases, one for each week that slips through your fingers. 7 courtyards for the 7 days of creation. This is not an architectural whim. It is an incantation, an attempt to lock the relentless march of time in a stone cage where he, Thomas Sackville, would be the master. To understand this madness, you have to look into his fear. He was the son of a man who was nearly destroyed by a change in power. His father, Sir Richard, had seen the crown's favor turn to dust. Thomas learned the lesson. A monarch's grace is sand. The only things that are eternal are stone and land. And so he built his fortress not against armies with cannons, but against time itself and the whim of the next ruler. Knole had to become as vast, as complex, and as inevitable as the changing of the seasons, so that no king, no creditor would dare to take it away. Why does a man need so many rooms? Not to live in, but to possess? It was a challenge thrown down to the old aristocracy, to those who had received their castles by right of blood stretching back through the centuries. Sackville was new money. His power was granted, not inherited, and he had to prove that his gold weighed no less than their ancient titles. Every battlement on the tower, every griffin carved above the entrance is not a decoration. It is a scream, the scream of his ego turned to stone. Look, I am here, and I will remain. He could not boast of ancestors who had stormed Jerusalem, so he created his own mythology, where coats of arms are gods and corridors are sacred texts. He was transforming the temporary political office of Lord High Treasurer into eternal dynastic power. This is the arithmetic of immortality. If you cannot stop time, you must build a house that becomes its measure. A calendar house where every day, every week belongs to you. Sackville was not creating a cozy nest for his family. He was erecting a monument to his own will. A cold, perfectly calculated universe of Kentish limestone, where he was the only god, and everyone else was merely a temporary tenant in the rooms of his eternal year. This construction was not an act of creation. It was a war against nature, against time, against human flesh itself. In the fields of Kent, where the earth is soft and yielding, Sackville unleashed his personal campaign. Hundreds of people, nameless, faceless, swarmed at the foot of the growing Leviathan. They were not building a house. They were ants, carrying the exorbitant ambitions of one man on their backs. The clang of iron against stone, a dull, rhythmic thud that never ceased, day or night. This is the sound of Kentish limestone, the very bones of this land, being torn from its body. It is carried on creaking carts, drawn by oxen whose flanks are rubbed raw to the point of bleeding. The roads turn into a muddy quagmire. Forests that have stood here for centuries fall to the swing of the axe, their timber destined to become the rafters that will hold the sky over the Lord Treasurer's head, and over all of this, his shadow. Thomas Sackville was not an architect hunched over blueprints. He was a general on a battlefield. He would arrive at dawn, his boots sinking in the mud, his gaze colder than the winter wind. He did not ask, he demanded. His finger would point to a crookedly laid stone, to a slow carpenter, to a crack in an oak beam. His voice was dry and even, and at its sound, everything turned to stone, both clay and men. He demanded the impossible, faster, higher, stronger. The master craftsman, brought from London, whispered of his madness. He was balancing on a knife's edge, on the brink of bankruptcy. But his position was his weapon. As Lord Treasurer, He acquired the finest materials at the lowest price. Prime oak, meant for Her Majesty's ships, would magically find its way to Knole. Stonemasons working on royal projects would suddenly receive orders to depart for Kent. He didn't steal. He reallocated resources. This house grew like a cancerous tumor, devouring everything around it. Money, forests, human lives. How many of them, these nameless builders, fell from the scaffolding? How many died of fever in the damp barracks? How many were maimed, heaving impossibly heavy blocks of stone? Their names are not carved into the walls. They are merely the invisible mortar binding the stones of Sackville's vanity. This was not construction. This was a subjugation. The subjugation of wild nature, transforming it into an orderly, geometric hell. The subjugation of human will, bending hundreds of lives to a single, all-consuming purpose. Knole did not grow from the earth. It devoured it. It absorbed its sap, its strength, its silent fury, and in its every stone, the silent scream of those whose sweat and blood paid for this dream of immortality is forever frozen. And now, it is complete. The stone monster stands still, digesting the lives and forests it has consumed. King James I arrives for a visit, and Knole erupts in a feverish blaze of glory. Music thunders in the great hall, reflecting off tapestries woven from golden threads. Wine flows like a river. Hundreds of candles and silver candelabras devour the air, their light snatching from the gloom the jewels on courtiers' necks, the sheen of satin, the complacent faces. This is the apotheosis, the triumph of Thomas Sackville's will. His stone incantation has worked. He has created a universe, and the king himself has come to bow before it. But when the music fades and the last carriages depart, a silence falls. And this silence is deafening. It is thicker than the darkest velvet, heavier than the most massive oak table. The facade, built to inspire awe, reveals its true nature. It becomes a prison, a gilded cage, 365 rooms, but the family lives in 5, maybe 10. The rest are cold, empty, shrouded in dust covers. The vast halls, designed for multitudes, now only multiply the echo of lonely footsteps. In these endless enfilades, one can get lost, one can scream and no one will hear. The house, built to impress the world, isolates its inhabitants from it. It crushes, it demands. Hundreds of servants glide through hidden corridors like ghosts. They are unseen, unheard. They are the circulatory system of this giant, maintaining the illusion of life in its staterooms. But they too are prisoners of this labyrinth, subservient not so much to the master as to the house itself, to its inscrutable rituals and routines. And so it begins, the first curse of Knole. It begins to demand sacrifices. The heirs, born in this stone womb, bear its weight upon them. Look at the third Earl, Richard Sackville, grandson of the great treasurer. He does not build. He spends. He burns through the fortune with the fury of a man trying to escape. Cards, dice, horse racing, the most expensive clothes in England. It is all a cry of desperation. He is trying to break free from the shadow of his ancestor, from the oppression of these walls that whisper of duty and greatness. Every sovereign lost is a small suicide, an act of defiance against the stone idol that demands worship. His marriage is not for love, but a business deal. Lady Anne Clifford, the richest heiress in the country, becomes his wife not by the call of her heart, but by necessity. Her dowry is not a gift, it is a ransom. Money to patch the holes in the sinking ship of the Sackvilles, holes made by Richard's gambling and profligacy. Knole is saved, but the price is the happiness of 2 people. The first sacrifices have been made upon the altar. Love, freedom, personal happiness, all of it thrown into the insatiable maw of the house. It must live. It must stand. And the people are merely the fuel that burns to maintain the cold fire in its enormous stone heart. The gilded cage has snapped shut, and its bars have proven stronger than human will. The illusion shattered. The gleam of the family silver could no longer hide the rust eating the family away from within. The conflict, smoldering behind closed bedroom doors, erupted like a wildfire. This was war, not for a crown, not for faith. This was a war for land, for money, a war of the roses and purses. On one side, Richard Sackville, the 3rd Earl of Dorset, heir to the name, but not the talent, a man whose debts grew faster than the ivy on the walls of his ancestral home. £60,000. In those days, a fortune capable of buying an army. For him, the lands of his wife, Anne Clifford, were not a sacred inheritance, but merely an asset, a resource to be liquidated, to pay off creditors, and continue his mad dance on the edge of the abyss. On the other side, her, Lady Anne, a woman in whose veins flowed the blood of ancient northern lords. For her, the land was not a commodity. It was memory. It was honor. It was her father's legacy, which she had sworn to protect. She found herself trapped in a marriage that was a financial transaction, and now her husband was trying to sell her soul to pay for his vices. Their battle unfolded not on fields of war, but in the stuffy halls of court, in the silence of lawyers' offices, and in the icy quiet of the marital bed. It was a war of humiliation. He, using his power as a husband and an aristocrat, tried to break her. She, using her intellect and unbending will, resisted. Knole House, this stone titan, was meant to be the symbol of their union, the merger of 2 powerful dynasties. Instead, it became both the grand prize and the weapon in their war. Richard, enraged by her defiance, delivers the cruelest blow. He banishes her. He forbids her from living at Knole, the house that was saved with her money. He excommunicates her from the heart of the family, leaving her alone with their daughters in another, lesser estate. It was a public humiliation, a demonstration of power. He was showing her, and the whole world, who was master. In that moment, it becomes clear. The house is more important than the people. Its preservation, its status, its integrity. This is the ultimate goal. And human feelings, loyalty, even basic decency, all can be sacrificed. Knole, which was meant to unite, became the wedge that drove the family apart. Its cold walls absorbed not only the echoes of feasts, but also the poisonous whispers of familial hatred. It watched in silence as a man and a woman, bound by marriage, tore each other to pieces. And it did not care, for it knew it would outlive them both. Time ground the generations of Sackvilles to dust, their wars, their debts, their passions, all settled like a thick layer of dust on the ancient furniture. The 20th century arrived, and the house faced a new, far more terrifying enemy. Not a king, not a creditor, but a man in a gray suit with a briefcase, the tax inspector. Death duties, inheritance taxes, became a guillotine for the aristocracy. They did what neither wars nor revolutions could. They forced them to sell the land, to sell the past, piece by piece. At the center of this quiet, paper war is a girl, a young Vita Sackville-West. She doesn't just live in Knole. She is Knole. She is its wandering spirit, its living memory. She knows the creak of every floorboard, knows how the light falls in the gallery on an October afternoon. She feels its breath, its shifting moods, its ancient sorrow. To her, it is not a collection of rooms. It is a living being, her only true friend, her greatest love. She is an only child. The logic of the heart tells her that all of this is hers. But there is another logic. Cold, masculine, unyielding. The logic of the law of primogeniture, a simple, cruel rule, carved not in stone, but in the very fabric of this world. The male inherits. The title and property pass down the male line. And it doesn't matter how much you love these walls. It doesn't matter that you are the only one who understands their language. You are a woman, and that is enough. Imagine the scene, not in a throne room, but in a quiet, book-lined library. The scent of leather and fading roses. Her father, the 3rd Baron Sackville, a man who also loves this house but is powerless before the law, must explain this to his daughter. His voice must have trembled. He tells her that the house, her world, her very skin, will pass to his brother, to her uncle, and then to a cousin she barely knows. This is not just news of losing a property. It is an amputation. In a single moment, her past, present, and future are severed by the dull knife of a legal paragraph. The tears she must have shed that day were absorbed by the same parquet floor that had absorbed the wine of kings and the blood of intrigue. Knole, which she considered an extension of herself, her own body, had just told her that she was a stranger, a ghost in her own home. The family's agony lasts for years. They fight. They try to find a way out. But the numbers on the tax ledgers are merciless. And in 1946, they sign their surrender. The house, which for 400 years had been the Sackville fortress, is handed over to the state, to the National Trust. To save it from being sold off, they give it away forever. And here is the final, most bitter twist. The family is allowed to stay, to live in a part of the house, but no longer as owners, as tenants. They pay rent for the right to breathe the air of their ancestors. The law of the father, the law of men, the law of the past has won. Knole is saved, but its soul has been exiled, and now a new, most bitter ghost has taken up residence in its endless corridors, the ghost of injustice. We are here again, in the present. Once again, we hear the squeak of sneakers on a 16th century parquet floor. But now we see it all through different eyes. We see not just tapestries, but silent witnesses to a family war. Not just a long gallery, but the place where a little girl who was robbed of her kingdom used to run. What remains of the grand ambitions of Thomas Sackville, his dream of an eternal dynasty carved in stone? It has become a tourist route, admission by ticket, a cafe in the old stables. His descendants are tenants in their own home. His name is a footnote in a guidebook. The stone that was meant to guarantee immortality has become a well-kept exhibit under the care of the state. But from this story of defeat, something else was born, something that proved stronger than stone. A voice, the voice of the rejected daughter. Having lost Knole, Vita Sackville-West did not break. She committed an act of creation. She and her husband bought the ruins of Sissinghurst Castle, and from the ashes created a garden, one of the greatest gardens in the world. This was her answer to the stone. Instead of owning the past, she began to cultivate the future, living, breathing, ever-changing, a legacy that obeyed not the law of primogeniture, but the laws of nature and her own will. And then she struck back, bloodless, elegant, and utterly devastating. She took her pain, her love, her rage, and transformed them into literature. She gave the story of Knole to her friend and lover, Virginia Woolf, and she wrote Orlando. The novel is her revenge, and her ultimate justice. The protagonist, Orlando, lives for 400 years. He changes eras, he changes sex, but his house, vast, ancient, with 365 rooms, remains unchanged. Recognize it? In the world of literature, Vita did what she could not do in life. She created an eternal heir who was both man and woman. She broke the curse of gender. She gave Knole to the one who was worthy of it. A soul, not a title. And here is an irony so profound, it takes history's breath away. Today, thousands of people come to Knole House not to see the legacy of the Lord Treasurer. They come because they have read Orlando. They are searching for Vita's ghost. They want to touch the place that gave birth to one of the greatest stories of love and loss in 20th century literature. Her word proved more durable than his stone. Her story of loss became the house's greatest treasure. Time has delivered its verdict. The titans who built palaces from their egos have turned to dust, while the fragile, vulnerable story of a rejected woman has become immortal. So what truly endures through the centuries? The monumental fortresses we build to cheat death? Or the quiet, poignant stories of what we have irretrievably lost? Knole House is silent, but the answer seems obvious. Power did not win. Poetry did. We've seen how ambitions, cast in stone, were meant to deceive time itself. But in the end, cold granite yielded to the living word, proving that the greatest legacy is born not from possession, but from the deepest loss. So what do we truly leave behind? The walls meant to protect our names from oblivion, or the stories that allow our souls to live forever? Whose victory in this centuries-long drama seems most real to you? Share your thoughts in the discussion below this video. Your support will allow us to continue telling stories where stone argues with poetry.